This is Iris's What Women with Autism Want You to Know.
When people think of a disease, they think of something that is degenerative and that will hurt you and kill you. Autism is not a disease. It is a developmental disability. It's about living our best possible lives with this condition.
Let's get it on HD.
I don't know, I always get the you don't look autistic thing. Autism is like an internal thing, not an external thing. No one looks autistic.
When people find that out, the first thing they're like, you don't act autistic. And I'm like, I had to go through a lot of stuff to learn how to mask my idiosyncrasies.
Autism isn't a linear spectrum of high or low. It's a whole bunch of different traits that are on their own spectrums. It's kind of a 3D weird mess.
Autism is simple.
It's kind of like a radar diagram, I would say. Like, I think the reason why I clipped this before for my Instagram page is just because there's a lot of good explanations from that one person. There's some goods from other people, of course, but I don't tend to get a lot of the "you don't look autistic" like quite a lot, because I don't know. I used to get them quite a lot when I was younger, I think, but as I've got older, I think, I've just kind of been a bit more like forthright with saying like, hey, look, yeah, I'm autistic. And then they ask questions and then they kind of understand it a bit more. They don't kind of jump to that like presumption kind of judgment mindset quite often. And if they do, I tend not to be like getting on with them very well anyway. So it's
a different way of thinking and seeing and interacting with one's world. I view autism as realness.
The words high functioning and low functioning are used by people, again, who are talking about autism from an outside point of view. So rather than using those labels, we tend to say minimal support needs and high support needs to describe the different kind of levels of the spectrum that people fall on.
I definitely would disagree with the idea that
it's not even like to do with levels. I think it's just literally just to do with like someone's support needs, which is why I tend to use that quite a lot, because it's not necessarily that like someone is more or less autistic. It's just they have traits. Some traits can be stronger in those people with high support needs, but it's not always the case, I like the idea of using like a radar diagram in terms of explaining like autistic traits rather than using like a spectrum, because it's definitely like this low to high, like this is where you're not as autistic, and then this is where you are more autistic. Whereas in reality, it is very much like some things, some traits, you are a bit stronger on, some things not so much. And everyone, to be honest, like, I think people really highlight too much or emphasize too much, like, the aspects of being autistic in terms of, like, who someone is, I think it is quite a large part of people, but there's a massive, like, experience, personality aspect to it. What's a radar diagram? I think radar diagram's the right word. It's like a kind of like a hexagon. Radial. There you go. Radial diagram. Here's another one. We don't have emotions. That seems to be something that went on quite a bit. Now it's kind of flipped on the other way. So let's see what these guys have to say.
not emotional. I think we're actually highly emotional. I think that we just, many times we don't express it the way that people expect.
I like the comparison to Vulcans. In Star Trek, lore, the Vulcans feel more strongly than humans. They just, don't show it.
We're feeling it. It's there. It just might not come out.
Autistic.
And then other times it might be overly expressed.
I mean, sometimes, we'll cry. I mean, that might be at, weird moments. I mean, you might think they're weird. I don't think they're weird.
It can be so overwhelming, so intense that in order to function, you kind of have to sort of be still or shut down a bit.
We can't filter them out because we feel them so strongly, so we shut down as a way of processing all those emotions.
Something that kind of came across my mind when I was thinking about a post recently was, we talk a lot about sort of emotion. A lot of autistic people that I've met kind of describe themselves as this empath person, like someone who kind of absorbs the energy of people, or the feelings and emotions of people that they're interacting with. I think that there might be some like level of like validity to that, even from just like a scientific standpoint, because a tendency for a lot of autistic people, especially if they're like high maskers, and they have been for a long time, is that they have this, there's an aspect of social camouflage whereby you have like masking, assimilation, compensation. And the assimilation aspect of that is that you mirror people. So you mirror their facial expressions, their body language, the way that they speak, the kind of the emotion in their voice. And science has actually shown that it is a two-way street. Like your expressions on the outside are not only just controlled by how you're feeling internally, but actually from the opposite way as well. So if you're a high masker and you mirror people quite a lot when you're talking to them, you're undoubtedly gonna kind of mirror the same or similar emotions to what they're feeling and kind of absorb it a little bit. Like it will affect you internally when that happens. And I think that's a really good way of, I guess, thinking about like the negatives of mirroring, because I suppose some people could say that like, if you mirror people, if you're different from person to person, they might call you like two-faced or something. But I couldn't really see many downsides to it. So I have recently been trying to kind of consciously be like, okay, right, no mirroring, sit in your own emotion. You know, it's quite a hard thing to break, to be honest, after years of self-conditioning. Tracy says, if you express your emotions, you get slammed. If you don't, you get called unemotional. Well, everyone's got something to say in any kind of negative situation. I think if you do something that people don't like, then people will always slam you either way. You know, I think it's very situational and dependent on who, you know, what's happening, I guess, because people say all sorts of things, you know. Next one is social interactions can be challenging. Let's have a little listen, a little looky.
To appear like the way I do right now, like it takes a lot of like conscious awareness. Social skills are like a muscle for us.
People will often say to me, "Oh, you're so high functioning, I would never know you had autism unless you said something." And I say, well, you don't live inside my skin, and you don't know how hard it is for me sometimes just to get through a day.
It's very, very draining. You know, even with people that I care for or enjoy being around, I have to psych myself up to be around them.
All the little things that everyone does unconsciously, autistic people do manually, so that adds up. What I'm doing...
That is a very, very good comparison. It's one that I use quite a lot. It's like we don't just kind of transiently pick up on social skills as we go about life. It's definitely more of like a cognitive process, especially when you're interacting with neurotypical individuals. I don't find that I get so much of that energy drain when I'm talking to kind of other autistic people. It does happen, you know, especially if like our personalities are quite different. But yeah, I think that's a really good point.
With every part of my body, I am to some degree aware of and trying to do.
A lot of women that I know who are autistic are not diagnosed until their 20s, 30s, or even beyond. A large part of this is because the way that we diagnose autism is by using criteria that were created observing boys. 100%. And autism looks different in girls and women than it does in boys.
People don't expect to see someone that looks like me or my two youngest children who are on the spectrum also. We know that anyone can, you know, be on the spectrum.
I didn't become aware of Asperger's until I was already an adult. At the time, finding a doctor was really difficult because there were people that were like, oh, women don't have that. And then there were other people that were like, well, you're too high functioning.
Biggie Stud asks, what is NT and what is AU? NT is neurotypical. Sometimes it's basically just means someone who doesn't have like a difference in their brain. Most people within the context of autism, it's meaning people who aren't autistic, but there is actually like a word for it. It's called autistic. So people who aren't autistic. And AU is autism.
When I was diagnosed myself, after my children were, I don't think I would have been otherwise. Women are underdiagnosed, Black women especially, and I think there's also this idea of, the strong Black woman. You kind of have to hold down the family and be able to just keep going and not address, your, whatever needs that you have, your support needs, not prioritize self-care. We just kind of slip through the cracks through the majority of our lives.
I remember parent-teacher conferences of teachers telling my mom that I should be in special ed, I was an ideal homeschool candidate, there was something wrong with my brain. I remember that one, that was cool.
And now I feel a lot better. I feel like, okay, I know why I'm this way, I know why other people are the way they are, so I can bridge this gap.
You invite a girl back to your apartment to walk.
That is very much like that hits home. Yeah, this is an interesting section of the video. I think I have watched this before, quite a while ago.
You invite a girl back to your apartment to watch a movie, and she thinks you're just watching a movie. Netflix and chill doesn't literally mean Netflix and chill. That often does happen when you have someone who is inherently a little bit more naive because they're so literal.
When we think of people on the spectrum as not being interested in sex,
there is that little literal component, Okay, probably a bit TMI. I've had this happen to me before. Like, when I was like really, really young, when I was at university, I think someone asked me to come back to their place, and I wasn't like interested in them, and I thought we were just literally going to play some like video games or something, and then it turned out that it wasn't like that, and I was like, oh, that's happened. So I can definitely attest to kind of not really understanding like the social nuances behind stuff like that, especially within dating. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult. Joe says, we met last month and being friend-zoned because I told him that we can be friends without pressure. Feel helpless now. It's always me who's initiating texting. Have you made like, have you like told them that, actually, I'm not cool with that, and tried to go on something a bit more romantic? Invite them out on a date or something. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Should be a law. It would be a lot easier if that's how the world worked, in a lot of circumstances, probably.
Not having any kind of sex drive or sexual interest, and it's just not true. We just may need more support in order to learn how to make that happen. We don't naturally understand the nuances that are involved in this, and there are a lot of nuances.
There's a huge thing where people think that people on the spectrum, that they all don't have relationships, and if they do, that it doesn't even reach a sexual point. Having or not having those things does not determine whether one is on the spectrum or not.
Some of the ways that I show love that he might have thought were odd, he now understands that it's just my love language, my way of communicating, and in a sense, he kind of serves as my interpreter to the neurotypical world.
Often autistic people don't get taught sex ed at all, let alone like how to protect themselves in like the real world from like date rape. These are topics that often aren't taught to autistic teenagers because adults.
And there's also like a lot of aspects even within friendships around like mate crime and stuff. I know that particularly when I was younger, like I was a lot less emotionally, socially developed than I am now. So stuff like that definitely did tend to, like, people kind of pick up on that you're not really understanding certain things in like a social context. It can lead to some very kind of bad times with other human beings. Hopefully we can have some like level of impact in terms of making people a little bit more direct with life and everything, workplace, relationships, whatever. It's always going to be helpful because it reduces the likelihood that miscommunication is going to happen. Although, to be honest, if you do like directly communicate with people, some people are just so used to being indirect about things that they'll think that there is something indirect behind your direct communication, no matter how kind of explicit you are with it. It's very strange. I'm old and past it now, not interested anymore.
Adults like don't want to deal with it.
Yes, people on the autism spectrum, especially women, are more likely to experience sexual assault or some sort of violent incident than the neurotypical non-autistic population. We are very vulnerable. We definitely can be more trusting because we are very honest and upfront people. So we don't think that other people might not be so honest and might, be trying to hurt us.
One of the traits of autism is not reading between the lines in social interactions, and so much of dating and sexuality is supposed to be indirect and subtle, and that it's inappropriate to talk about sex in a direct way, even when you're teaching it as sex ed. Most of what they tested us on were the mechanics and can you label the diagram? No one's teaching the social aspects. And honestly, this is where autistic people are the canaries in the coal mine. Teaching.
I think the social aspects of it are definitely the most important. What can happen? What are bad situations to get into? What do you think people mean by this when they say certain things? I feel like everybody could do with that. Because especially if you teaching kids, teenagers and stuff, being able to explain to them these things so that it doesn't happen to them, I think is just massively important. If they're autistic or not. I mean, especially for autistic people, but it's kind of one of those things. It's a lot of the adjustments and changes that we make for autistic people in life. It's still it usually helps neurotypical individuals as well, holistics. 100%. It's you change some of the sensory environment to make it a lot more calming, pleasing, less bright and noisy and open. It's obviously going to have a positive impact on the rest of the staff. It's just that we're more sensitive to and more attuned to it. Some just games, covert/hiding. Just smile and leave the building and go find better friends. You speak in facts.
The social aspects of sexuality would help everyone. Autistic people need it, but it also benefits everyone.
There's the stereotype that everyone with autism is into science and math and stuff, like Rain Man, but a lot of people with autism, women actually, especially, a lot of us are into the arts.
In my experience,
100%.
Autistic girls are also just as obsessive as autistic boys. They're just obsessed with, fantasy novels or their favorite bands or whatever, not, planes, trains, and automobiles.
But I'm more of a social science and literary person, and I've met a lot of other people on the spectrum who are into languages or music or art, and I think we thrive in some of those non-traditional areas.
I just sang it.
I've talked about this a lot, but I think it's definitely one thing that Temple Grandin had wrong with her book Thinking in Pictures. I'm definitely a language processor. I'm not a picture person. I can visualize quite well in my head, to quite a good detail. But I'm definitely more interested in the social language side of things. And also, yeah, I mean, the majority of autistic people that I know, large majority, probably more into the arts and stuff. I suppose that there could be some crossover because I guess perhaps some of the communities that I've been in on Instagram tend to be a bit more skewed towards that. Perhaps the people who are into the maths and the computers and the STEM fields and stuff, they might not be so quick to come upon stuff like that.
Carnegie Hall. I'm a writer.
I definitely started off with the interests of astronomy. I actually ended up being one of the Mars One finalists, but it tends to be a stereotype, and I did fall into that stereotype.
When I was younger,
Me too.
I had no outlet. Nobody wanted to hear from me, and I felt that I couldn't be myself, so I turned to writing.
It'd be really good to get these people together again to have a look at, or to speak more on this stuff, because they all have such varied approaches, but they all just speak facts,
People picked on me for any number of things, and I didn't know why. I didn't know what it was that they saw that was different. Nobody would ever tell me that. It's like somebody making fun of a blind person, only in this case you're blind socially.
I felt broken. I felt strange. I felt different. Everything was so simple for other people. Everything they understood so easily that I couldn't understand, that I couldn't grasp or do. I just didn't understand what was so wrong with me.
The travails and difficulties I experienced with bullying and with being suicidal from a very young age. And I would say that we all start from somewhere, but that isn't necessarily where we're going to end up. And you have to believe that there is going to be a future. I didn't have that belief at that point. I didn't know that I was even going to have a future.
It's very difficult to go through.
It's definitely one of the aspects of being autistic that I think has like a really big impact on like our overall life outcomes. It's tough, and it affects a lot of people. And it's right, and that is again like a really good comparison. It's like making fun of a blind person, like making faces at them and stuff when they can't see it. It's like it's a very good like explanation of what autism, bullying an autistic person is like socially with the indirect communication. There's also, as I said before, like a lot of mate crime, a lot of people taking advantage of autistic people and manipulating us and everything like that. I remember the time that I realized just how like different or just how behind socially I was in terms of the neurotypical school that I was at. I think it was like a time probably like when I was about 11, 12. We came back after like the school holidays, and I don't know, it felt like everyone just in the school or in my form, my year, whatever, they got together and they just had like a secret club, and they had particular phrases and language and ways of going about things, and they just all decided on it. And then at one stage, came back off summer holidays, everybody was in the know, and I was just completely like unable to understand what was going on.
Many years, especially as a child, having no friends and no one willing to extend a hand out of friendship to you.
As I got older, like there were like high school, college, afterwards, there's enough misfits in the world, like people who got picked on. There's so many of us. So you do find your tribe.
To finally have friends is such a big deal.
I think if that 10-year-old girl could see what her life was going to be now, she wouldn't believe it. She would think it was some fairy tale or something out of a movie. I can't believe it because it almost seems like a dream at times that I've gotten to where I am, that I have a master's degree, that I've started my own business. And I also can believe it because I worked for it. And so I'm willing to give myself the credit that I think I deserve, which has always been something I've also struggled with.
I wished I could go back to that little Marinike and give her a hug and let her know that she was just fine the way she was and that she was going to be all right.
I think things are going to be...
And here's the thing, we need more people like this to be out there. And there is becoming more people who are just out there as role models. Like, it was definitely like the YouTube space, the amount of autism content on YouTube at the time that I was young. It was pretty much non-existent. It was mostly just science-related things, research studies, like WebMD articles, the odd like psychology website. There was not really much, and just the fact that this kind of video is out there, I think, can provide a lot of inspiration for people. I think is really important because I actually like one of the things that really got me through when I was younger is that I always had in my head that things were going to be different after school. They might be a bit harder, they might be a bit different to what I expect, but they were always going to be different to my experience at school. And it was. And, the first kind of couple of years at uni, definitely very difficult. Didn't really have many friends, didn't really have many social connections, didn't really go out and do much other than taekwondo and do my studies. But once I kind of came out of my shell a little bit, things started to seem a lot brighter. It's important to have that in mind because it is, school is school, and the people at school that you think are all high and mighty, and like project that upon people and bully and do all of this stuff, it's not necessarily going to mean that they're going to be the same in adulthood. Speaking from personal experiences, looking for like people I've known in the high school, and like, you know, it's definitely not the case. It's a very small part of our lives, but it can often be very, very impactful just by the nature that it's our formative years.
A lot better for the next generation. Like, I'm actually really hopeful.
100%.
They are going to be diagnosing children more, and there is going to be more social acceptance.
You know, your kid might be behind their peers, but it doesn't mean they're going to be behind forever. Your kid is a full human being who will grow and change just like everyone else.
I would just love to see every autistic person living up to their fullest potential, whatever that is for them. Success is about your child growing up to be the best version of themselves that they can be, whoever and whatever that is.
Don't you agree, guys? What an awesome, like, interview video with people. I felt like they had a lot to offer. A lot of really interesting takes on different aspects of being autistic. Very much worthy of the 3.7 million views that it got. And it was made 4 years ago, so it's true today. And so that was What Women with Autism Want You to Know from Iris. If you want to go check out the YouTube channel, it's quite a big one. They got some other ones, similar sort of vein, theme, stuff like that. Really cool. Thanks for that. And everybody who was in that interview, good on you.